This video is about the Teleregister Corporation. They invented and marketed big stock quotation boards, which were hooked up by Western Union to New York City to give people who had access to it. It was very expensive, took up the whole wall, to give quotes to people. Now, originally, the stock market in New York was just, this is back in the early 1900s, a chalkboard on the wall, and people would write on there with chalk the price change. And the only people who would know about what had happened were the people in the room, but you could call them on the phone. Your broker could call them and then give you a quote and let you know where you're at. But it took a lot of time for this to occur. But there weren't that many companies listed on the stock exchange, and there weren't that many people buying and selling stocks because most people didn't have the money to do it, or they didn't know how you could make money doing that. In this case here, a lady's looking at the ticker tape coming out of the ticker tape machine, and then she was calling out to the other lady the prices, and there's a whole bunch of little cards that they would insert on the board to tell any onlookers what the prices were. This is a example of a ticker tape. This is from the early 60s. I think before this, they were punched like either dots or holes or something. I don't remember actually really seeing one of those, but this is what they had. Tell you where you are at, name of the company, how much the value was at that time. And this went on all day long. It was primitive, but it's what they had. And there'd be a room full of people all watching the board. This is what they called the big board. And they would move the numbers up on there and keep changing them constantly, let people know. And then your broker, could be in Cleveland, would call somebody at the stock exchange to see what values were. In 1928, the Teleregister Corporation came up with a electromechanical board, and it would give you constant changing stock prices. They were expensive, so not many offices would have them. New York, Philadelphia, maybe Denver might have one, Houston. But your broker, you would call your broker, the broker would call in to somebody who had this display in their office and tell you what the prices were. What they were made of is a little metal box with a bunch of numbers in a circle going around, and these were electronically fired all day long. There's a video on YouTube of a lady scientist who experiments with one of these just to show you how it works and what it would do, which is very interesting. In the around 1965, 63, a movie was made with James Garner and Lee Remick about Wall Street traders, and they wanted to make it interesting, have some interesting characters that were entertaining. And Wall Street traders were somewhat dull. They talked on phones and made deals all day long. They wore suits, but college professors and teachers wore suits. Doctors wore suits. Businessmen wore suits. Everybody wore suits, so it didn't stand out very much. So in order to have a more interesting character, they came up with a bunch of Texas people, and they were the symbol at 1963 of wealth, and they were characters. They were loud and doing deals. So this was a symbol of wealth for this movie, and they had some publicity shots done at the stock market, and here you can see the teleregister board in the background. And this was not actually part of the movie. This was just a publicity shot that they did. These boards are very expensive, and so in time, in the early 60s, the Teleregister Corporation came up with a phone. This is called a telequote. And you'd have a little book, would have all the companies in it with numbers next to them. You dial the number of the company you want to quote on, and you'd hear a robot lady's voice on the other end tell you what the quote is. And this worked much better because they weren't so expensive. Everybody who had a brokerage office who wanted to sign up, they had enough business to warrant this equipment rental and everything, would have this Teleregister telequote phone in their office there. And in another publicity shot, they're actually using the telequote phone. And there he's got a little book for the numbers, and he's dialing one up. This is all posed. After World War II, the Teleregister Corporation also got into airline seat machines. And here's one here. And this would reserve seats and keep track of everything. And they were also doing warehouse memories, keeping track of records in warehouses. The next step was the Telequote 3, which is this one right here. And it was primitive by our standards today, but at the time it worked very well. You had a book and you look up certain letters or numbers and type them in. And then there was a little television screen, very small, which would have orange or red letters inside, grainy, but it would tell you a quote right there. And again, you didn't need a great big wall display and all the expense of that. Everybody who wanted to sign on for the rental could have this on their desk, and immediately somebody could call you, a client, you could tell them a quote just by popping it up. Later on in the 60s, they came up, the Teleregister Corporation was bought by the Bunker-Ramo Corporation. And you can see they're making more modern style what we have today, a big screen and a keyboard. Bunker-Ramo was George Bunker and a man named Ramo, who was part of TRW, Thompson Ramo Woodrich Corporation. And they got together, they wanted to get into communications, and it was Simon Ramo. And they got the financial backing from TRW and Martin Marietta was the other part that supplied money to them to get this on rolling. And they were very successful. They bid against IBM to do the New York Stock Exchange. They didn't get that contract, but they got the contract to do the American Exchange, wired up for the first time with computers. They also did a lot of defense work. They did a lot of, in the 80s, banking computers, brokerage house computers. They were in uptown Manhattan in the beginning, but then moved out to Stamford, Connecticut, sometime I think in the 50s. And then when Bunker Ramo took them over, they moved up to Tumbrill, Connecticut. And they were bought by Allied Signal, and then they were today they're owned by Allied Signal, and then today it's Honeywell owns them. I had always wanted to get a Teleregister stock. I never was able to do it, but I did find on eBay one time a warrant, and it was from Germany. I think somebody must have had this in a safe box, and it came on the market on eBay, and I got it. It's good for 5 years, I think, and it expired void after 1965. So this one has survived. If you go on the internet looking for old stocks for sale, there's a bunch of Packard, Studebaker, other things that are interesting, but a lot of them that I've looked for just don't, they never came to the surface again, never came out. I don't know why, unless there were not so many to begin with, and the survivors of what you see today. It could be that way. But anyway, that is the story of the Teleregister Corporation, what they invented, what they promoted and marketed, and did very well